This is Focus Richmond, covering the issues, people, events, and news affecting Central Virginia.
Welcome to Focus Richmond. I'm Rich Jacobs. My guests this morning are Sheer Bodner, Ira Korson, and Rabbi Andrew Goodman. Almost made it through that without stammering. We're going to be talking about a project called Draw Back the Curtain. I'll get you guys to explain what that is in a moment. Ira, you're featured in the film part of this project. Sheer, you're the director.
Yes.
And you work for Jewish Family Services.
As a business analyst,
okay.
Yes.
And Rabbi Andrew Goodman, you're co-executive producer of the film.
Correct.
Or the whole project.
Well, the project and the film are sort of one and the same. It started as a historical endeavor, wanting to really capture the stories of Jews who came from the former Soviet Union starting in 1989. And as part of wanting to document the stories, we also decided that we wanted to make a documentary film. And so there was the historical piece as well as the film piece and the museum pieces and the educational pieces. And so Draw Back the Curtain is both the umbrella as well as the name of the feature-length documentary.
Right. And you work for the University of Richmond. What do you do for them?
I am the director of Jewish life and campus rabbi in the Office of the Chaplaincy.
Got it. Okay. That's simple enough. All right. Tell me about the project. Draw Back the Curtain. This isn't just a film. This is something that you guys have been working on for 3 years, along with a lot of other folks. How did it start? Just jump in.
So I started at the University of Richmond, and we were looking for substantive ways to engage with the community. So wanting to get my students together, and we met with Jewish Family Services in trying to find a way that we could work with the community in a way that was necessary for the community and in a way that would be meaningful for the students. When we sat around my kitchen table at a retreat in my kitchen, it was clear that there was this Russian Jewish immigrant community in town that we resettled 25 years ago and really haven't done enough with. And shortly thereafter, I think it was Sheer who came up with the idea of wanting to engage deeper, and I think the project was born right after that.
Well, how did you know about this community?
So I was a student at the time at the university. I was one of those students around the kitchen table, and I had stepped out of being kind of going into my last year, stepped out of the student arena and started working in the community and realizing that a lot of people hadn't heard the story. And so it came up because Jewish Family Services had been the resettlement agency and coordinated a huge volunteer network back in the 90s to support these people to come from the former Soviet Union. And so that's when the idea was kind of born that this is a story that needs to be told. We hadn't engaged with people who had resettled 25 years ago, and we're curious to know who they were, what they were doing in our community, and that was the beginning. All
right, give me some background. These are Russian immigrants who resettled in the United States, specifically in the Richmond area, in the 1990s.
So the story is the former Soviet Union had closed borders for 70 years.
Right.
Very little people coming in and out. And throughout the 80s, there was a huge American movement that rallied for opening the borders. And that happened. The Richmond Jewish community was specifically involved in something called Operation Exodus, which lobbied for political asylum and people to leave as refugees. And that happened in 89 under Gorbachev. And specifically, Jews were allowed to leave, and 1 million did. And
are we talking about around the same time Reagan said, tear down these walls?
Yes, and it continued when the Soviet Union disintegrated,
right.
And throughout the 90s and even the 2000s, people were coming, and at the beginning it was for family reunification.
Because they had family already here.
Yes.
Okay.
And so once the borders did open, quite a few people came to the States, and this is kind of a story that has been mirrored in other cities, but who knew that in Richmond, Virginia, there were 800 families that came. And so that was kind of a shock to the community once it happened. I mean, a lot of people were rallying for immigrants to come, but then it was like, oh man, there's 50 families arriving this month. What are we going to do? They're going to look for jobs and places to live, and we need to kind of support them in arriving. And so that was the project then, and the project now is kind of getting to realize what those stories are, both on the volunteer side of someone who might have been waiting at the airport or helping people get their driver's license or put together a resume, and also people who came and what the experience was like to come and say, not think that someone might greet you at the airport, but have a really welcoming experience.
Ira, what's your part of the story?
So I immigrated with my family as a young 7, almost 8-year-old. In 1989, we left the former Soviet Union. I had just finished zero class, which is, I guess, the equivalent of kindergarten in Russia. And 3 months into that, we started the immigration process, and 8 months in Italy, 2 weeks in Austria, and finally came to the wonderful United States, Richmond, Virginia.
Do you remember that whole process?
Yes, I do. I remember it with a lot of fun and multiple languages and a lot of body language and communications and singing and fun. I think if you were to ask my parents, it would be a very different story. A lot of stress. If you can imagine, if your listeners can imagine at the age of 45, completely starting a new life, leaving what you have, the comfort of what you've built, a career, a family, a house, and going to a place of opportunity, quote unquote, without knowing what that truly means.
Right.
It was a huge risk and an undertaking, and they did that because they wanted my brother and I to have a better life, to not be greeted with anti-Semitism, to not be greeted with limitations in our opportunities, even though we knew we could accomplish something more. And so that was the huge catalyst.
Well, listening to what you're saying, it just occurs to me that you must, or whoever, one must really, really loathe the situation that they're in to basically pack up and leave everything and go off and start over again where you have nothing. I mean, it's got to be a bad situation. That's pretty much what you're telling me, that the Jews were being persecuted in Russia. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and I would say at that time it was a very different Russian than what we read about today and what we see today. At that time, someone could say the wrong thing and disappear from your work circle.
Well, it's getting back towards that way under Putin.
So it's a very different situation. Both my mother and my father were salutatorian, valedictorian of their class. They earned their medal. In Russia, you get a medal for this. In a restroom, and were not publicly acknowledged. Someone else walked across the stage to receive the medal because
they're Jewish?
Yes. In fact, at that time... Yeah.
Do you understand how absolutely bass-ackwards that sounds? How backwards a society must be that something like that would be tolerated?
As an American today, yes.
But then,
but back then, it was your life.
It's just the way it was.
Yeah, it was the way it was. My parents had an ID card, the equivalent of a license here in the States. And if you can imagine, on your license, it would spell out your religion. So it would say Jewish on your driver's license. And so that meant that if you were going for medical school or to get a job, it was right there. And the animosity against the Jewish population was so strong. And honestly, I would say a lot of religions, because under communism, there was no room for spirituality and religion.
Well, I was going to say, is it religion in general, or is it especially Jews, or what's...
Both.
Both?
Yeah. Both.
Like if
And I'm coming from the perspective of 3 years ago saying if I'm going to interview people, I need to understand what the experience was. And so, communism, there was no room for religion, period. But even before the Soviet Union had formed, there was just kind of an ingrained anti-Semitism where you just saw these periods of if there was economic downturn, it just kind of got worse for Jews.
Right.
And also, we often think of religion as just how one practices their faith. But for the entirety of Judaism. It's been Judaism has been a culture, it's been a tradition, it's been a language, a way of communicating, a way of celebrating. So it'd be one thing if it were just not allowing the practice, but because there was so much cultural and personal identity that went with that, it ended up limiting much more than just what someone's faith could have been expressed as. It ended up limiting community and how one engages as one's whole self. And so it is much more insidious than just you can't practice your religion.
Right.
It becomes much more, it's this holistic thing that, we hear a story in the film. Actually, Ira's mom shares the story where the ingrained anti-Semitism, people don't even know what it is. Like young kids don't even know what it is, but they know that Jews are bad, or they've learned that Jews are bad, and it has nothing to do with religion. It's this cultural element and it's conflated. All those different levels of identity are conflated.
So why did this? Well, it wasn't like one chunk of people that all immigrated at the same time. I guess, and Richmond wasn't the only place that these folks came to, but there's a fairly large community for a town as large as Richmond, which is to say not all that large.
Richmond, after very soon in the resettlement process, was honored as a preferred community for resettlement from HIAS, which was the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society that worked to bring people from their stopover places in Austria or Italy. And we were recognized as a preferred community because specifically how welcoming people were, and the volunteer network that came together from all across the community, whether it was different synagogues or the community as a whole. Doctors and dentists pulled together. People set up a warehouse of all kinds of things to support families in gathering materials for their new homes. And it was such a welcoming experience in Richmond that it kind of explains why this community of this size was recognized and why it's worthy of a film.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, every Jew who came from the former Soviet Union came through HIAS, based out of New York City. And HIAS started trying to place people with different agencies around the country. Obviously, there was the preferred communities like New York City, Chicago, places that people have heard of. But HIAS there was an influx, an amazing amount of people who came in a very short period of time. So they had to start assigning people to maybe less obvious communities. And as Sheer said, the fact that Richmond did it so well, we were one of the few preferred communities in the States. Anecdotally, you hear that like New York City gave you a small check and a pat on the back and just said, okay, welcome.
Have at it.
Yeah. And Richmond, there was housing assistance, there was job assistance, there was language assistance, there was a lot of acculturation and helping people learn language and education and really bringing people together. And that's something that, you can't take for granted when you are completely stepping off of a plane into a very new environment. The fact that we could do that, I think, gave us that preferred status.
Who was responsible for it primarily? Was that Jewish Family Services that was instrumental in helping?
So Jewish Family Services no longer has a resettlement program. This was kind of an emergency thing of we have people coming and we need to help them. And that's kind of the point of the agency is filling those gaps for the community. And so at the time, they hired a resettlement director and there was a translator. And as the need came about, it kind of developed also a vocational service at Jewish Family Services, which today we don't have simply because we don't have that need. But at the time it was thriving, and there are so many wonderful stories of people using that service. Actually, Ira's mom became a vocational counselor. That was the word. Vocational counselor at JFS at the time, because she knew the community coming in. She had the language, and they came a bit earlier, and so she was very supportive of hundreds of people in making their way.
I would like to speak to that if I can. When we first came to the United States, now granted, you're hearing this as an impression from an 8-year-old. One of the things that was absolutely astounding is we walk off the plane. Now, keep in mind that we were a family, so it was my brother and I, who's 3 years older than me, my parents in their mid-40s, and my mother's side her parents, so my grandparents. So they're taking care of 2 elders and 2 kids.
Right.
And we walk off the plane. The former Soviet Union gave us nothing. We could take... I mean, it's not even worth talking about the kind of money we had to take. Nothing that would be able to support an apartment and a life and buying a car, which you have to have in Richmond, right? All of those kind of things. And so we walk off the plane. We're greeted by people in the community of Richmond who are in open arms with smiles, transportation to where we're going to go. It turns out we have a home. We have an apartment. We have a warm place to come home to. The bed is made. The food is on the table. I mean, it was just beyond anything you could imagine, especially considering we had nothing to our name at that point, right? All of our luggage and everything is in transit. The little money we have is not something that could sustain. My parents knew that they would have to hit the ground running to find a job, learn the language, which they were starting to do back in Russia. And so out of the get-go, the community was so warm, so welcoming. There were people that came out of the woodwork, not only from the Jewish community, but I remember, John Ball and his family who took myself on. He had a younger daughter my age. He would take me out for ice cream. We'd go to the mall. He'd take us to do videos. I have a little video to this day of us dancing in the mall.
We've seen that video.
Yeah. I would like to see that.
It's amazing. Who would have thought I had musical talent even back then? And my brother and I also got taken in by another family, the Heifetz, who took us camping. I mean, we had a normal childhood that anyone else in this community could have, because of the hearts and minds and sense of community that this city has. So it's just amazing that the Jewish community organized this effort, and I think beyond that, it speaks great volumes to the Richmond community at large.
Yeah, actually, and one thing, Jewish Family Services was the agency tasked with the resettlement efforts here in Richmond, but it couldn't have happened without all of the individuals. And every synagogue in town got behind, had volunteer coordinators, and were mobilizing their congregants. There were warehouses of furniture and other stuff. There was volunteer donors and transportation and jobs and all that stuff. And so while Jewish Family Services was the nucleus and the coordinating agency, it really was an entire community. And I think, as Ira just said, it wasn't just the Jewish community. It really was this. I think it shows the heart and soul that Richmond has.
Yeah. Jewish community gave us the jumping off point, and the city and its people took it from there. And my parents got their first job thanks to the Jewish Family Services with practically very little English. Here you have 2 folks with PhDs going out and cleaning bathrooms and delivering newspapers. I mean, most immigrants don't go back to what they did. What their professions that they had developed. My dad was a business owner. He had his own architecturing business, his own firm, his own employees, very profitable, very successful at the time. My mother was a chemistry and biology professor in the former Soviet Union. Her students were traveling the world, taking awards for in competitions, and here she is, cleaning bathrooms, and my father delivering newspapers. I mean, it was a pretty big shock to them, but they were determined to make it work. They knew why they left, and I think it speaks to the fearlessness that my parents had, that I hope I have an inkling of. And I couldn't imagine making that kind of dive.
Yeah.
So actually, that's how we developed our tagline for the film is "What would you sacrifice for the American
let's
dream?"
get to the film because it opens November 10th at the Maudlin Center for the Arts at U of R at 7 o'clock. And tell me what we'll experience when we see the film.
Well, first of all, you'll walk down a red carpet.
Oh,
But the film is just under an hour, and it weaves the stories of about 30 people from different generations, whether you came at the age of 7 or 60. And so you have a few interviews in Russian, and there are subtitles. But it really gives you a picture of what people were leaving, and sometimes it was really successful careers, and their choices were made in consideration of bigger things, and ultimately the beautiful part is that they're really happy with their choice to come, and they do identify as Americans, and they strongly feel part of our Richmond community. And so the film is meant to celebrate how successful we were in resettlement in the 90s, but also recognize that that's part of our Richmond history. A lot of us don't know that people are here and that they came in the 90s, and so we'll have a lovely reception after the film screening at the booth lobby in the Maudlin Center, and our entire community is welcome.
how do you get tickets? What do they cost?
The tickets are free.
Free?
Though registration is required. We have a website, drawbackthecurtain.com, and registration is available there.
How many people can you accommodate? Because I think they're going to be beating down the doors to get in to see this thing.
That's a fantastic problem to have. We Camp Concert Hall seats just shy of 500, maybe
Actually,
just shy of 600.
It's 570 is the number.
Okay. And while this will be the gala premiere in the fall, our hope is to, we know it will be shown a couple of other times, but our hope is that there will be other opportunities to see the film if this one Monday night in November you're unable to make it. But this premiere is really going to be, it'll be a scene, it'll be wonderful. There's a band made up of people who did come from the former Soviet Union playing just wonderful music, and it is really going to be a celebration, a chance to, it's a reunion of sorts. The people who all came together 25 years ago, the people who were resettled 25 years ago, everyone who came together in the last 3 years to make this project happen, just Richmond in general, it will be able to come together and celebrate. And then if you're unable to make this premiere, there's also going to be, there'll be a showing on the local PBS station.
So I'll jump in.
Right.
We will definitely have posted all of the upcoming opportunities other than the premiere on the website.
Drawbackthecurtain.com.
And those include a PBS showing next summer. And until then, we actually have November 17th, a museum exhibition that will come up, and that includes artifacts that people had brought with them, and a slew of photographs and news articles from the 90s when people were arriving.
Where's that going to be?
That's at Beth Ahaba Museum and Archives on West Franklin. And other than that, we will also have a film screening next May for American Jewish History Month at the Jewish Community Center.
The Weinstein Jewish Community
Center. Right, out in the West End. Who did the technical side of this? Who shot it? Who edited it?
That's actually one of the most, I think, the best parts of the film. The joke early on, Greg Davidson, who is currently the CEO of JFS, but is also the other co-executive producer, had he and I created the film, it would have been boring. It would have been just boring as all get out. But what we were able to do is we were able to mobilize and harness the creativity and the excitement of the students on campus. And so a lot of the... Sheer, when she was a student, the interview questions, the fact-finding, the actual filming itself was done by students.
Got it.
And
okay.
That creative impulse of the students, I think, really shows. It's a vibrant film. It's dynamic, and it's much more exciting than if, some rabbi had to come up with a compelling film. It would not be good. So the technical aspects in that way, the front end was all done by the students. And then on the back end, we had a local production company, Human Story, who were just amazing at helping us polish this material into a really sexy package.
I do have to add that the excitement around this project has just been amazing. We did not intend for there to be multiple museum exhibitions or an upcoming digital archive. This all kind of grew as the excitement grew, and we've actually tallied over 8,500 volunteer hours, and whether that's the students but also people across the community who have put their time into this in music production for the film, in searching for all of those old newspaper articles, archiving all of them. There's just been a really beautiful coming together again to mirror what happened in the 90s.
The film is Draw Back the Curtain. That's the name of the film and the name of the project. Mm-hmm. The film premieres November 10th. It's right around the corner at 7 o'clock at the Modlin Center for the Arts, Camp Concert Hall at the University of Richmond. Get your tickets. Doesn't cost you a thing, but they do need to know you're coming. So go to the website, drawbackthecurtain.com. You can get information there about all the other projects and exhibitions and other showings of the film related to the project. Drawbackthecurtain.com is where you want to go. My guests have been Ira Korschen, Sheer Bodner, and Rabbi Andrew Goodman from the University of Richmond. We've been talking about Draw Back the Curtain. Check it out. Go to drawbackthecurtain.com.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Focus Richmond, a production of Summit Media Corporation.